Hey, good morning, everybody. My name is John Rogers. Um, Recording a testimonial video for Aortic Hope. A few facts about me, a little bit of background about my life before my um, dissection. I'm 49 years old. I live in the suburbs of Philadelphia. Um, I have a wife and two boys, now ages 11 and 13. At the time, they were 9 um, and 11. Uh, I At the time of my aortic dissection, life was really beautiful, and it's beautiful to this day. It's just it's different. There's a new factor in my life, and that's my cardiac condition. Um, but um, I guess backing up a little bit, I was diagnosed in 2020 with a prolapsed mitral valve with um, moderate regurgitation. Um, that was detected during a routine PCP visit where my doctor heard a murmur and referred me to a cardiologist who identified that, it was mitral valve disorder, and at that time also diagnosed me with an aortic aneurysm um, measuring, I believe, 3.2 centimeters at that time. Um, we decided to take a watchful waiting approach. So I was not immediately scheduled for surgery, um, but did do echoes and other imaging. My heart was at that time not really enlarged, and my heart function was good. I mean, my EKGs were good, my echoes were good, my ejection fraction was in the mid 60s. So all the metrics were pretty good. So we decided to take a watchful waiting approach with my heart. Over the course of roughly the next year, 2 years, I suppose, my heart enlarged to about twice its normal size. So I had an enlarged left ventricle. And My aneurysm was about 3.5 centimeters. And at that time, my cardiologist referred me to a surgeon at a Philadelphia hospital. And I went for a consult. Um, and the surgeon said, we're going to recommend either a mitral valve replacement or repair, depending on what we see when we get in there. And while we're in there, we'll do a drive-by surgery on the aorta and do an aortic graft. This was, by the way, an aneurysm on my ascending aorta. Um, I wasn't at the threshold for surgery if I had just had a standalone aortic aneurysm. It was the presence of the mitral valve disorder as well as the aneurysm that made me a surgery candidate. But I was otherwise cleared for normal activity, and again, my metrics were good. But that consult with the surgeon was in January of 2023, and my surgery was scheduled for, I believe, late March of 2023. By a world-class surgeon that was recruited to a local health system in order to develop their aortic um, cardiothoracic surgery department. So I felt I was in good hands. A little bit of just pause right there. A little bit of sort of background or sort of a health profile for me. I mean, I've had one hip replacement due to some arthritis. It was probably like a sports injury that I just let go too long. But other than that, I never really had any health issues, chronic health conditions, high blood pressure that was being treated with medication, with statins. Cholesterol was a little high, but that was under control with Lipitor, but like nothing else. I am a former smoker. I was a heavy smoker in my 20s. Um, but by the time I got married in 2003 or four, I got married in 2004. It was no, that's not true. Got got engaged in '04. Got married in '06. But anyway, um, I I really wasn't smoking. Couple slips here and there, but it's been a long time since I was a smoker, and I haven't had a cigarette now in like probably 10 years. Um, so anyway, I was scheduled for surgery in March of 2023. My cardiologist had a little bit of a debate with the surgeon about whether I was really a candidate for a full mitral valve replacement. He was advocating for a repair, mainly so that I would not have to go on warfarin, which he thought was really difficult to manage and sort of a major imposition on one's life, major adjustment. I have thoughts on that in retrospect because I do take warfarin now, and I think that those concerns were overblown by my cardiologist. But and I should say former cardiologist. um, so anyway, I just kind of continued with my life. Was relieved to have the surgery scheduled. Was certainly preparing for it, getting things lined up at work for an extended leave, because I was anticipating maybe a 4 to 5 hour surgery with a maybe 3 days to a week in the hospital, and a recovery of a month or two before I could return to work. This is based on my memory of those conversations around the elective surgery. Um, but anyway, so went about my life, put in, scheduled the PTO to have the surgery and got everything lined up. So the, the weekend of, I think, February 18th of 2023, my family and I went for an annual ski trip to the Adirondacks in upstate New York. We went to a ski resort called Whiteface. It's near Lake Placid. It's the site of the 1980s Winter Olympics, the Miracle on Ice, all that stuff. We went up with another family, close friends, and my family, my wife, and my children. We all like to downhill ski, and we were sharing a house with this other family, and their two children. And it may or may not be related. I often wonder. There's never been a definitive answer to this. But the night before we went skiing, I did spend a fair amount of time in the hot tub at the house. And then the next morning, we went out on a very cold day to ski downhill. And I don't know if the temperature changes and barometric pressures and those sort of things may have had some impact on what occurred next. We'll never know, and it doesn't really matter. um, but we had a full day of skiing. Everything was fine. Toward the end of the day, maybe mid-afternoon, um, my ski boot was really uncomfortable. There was a lot of pressure and some pain in my foot, which is not unusual. I wear performance boots. They're very tightly fitted. Um, they're generally a bit uncomfortable. So I really didn't think anything of it. But I told Jen, my wife, to take the kids, ski down to the lodge, pick up the car, from the lot and swing around, and I'll meet you, but I'm going to sit down and adjust my boot. Um, so we had skied about 3/4 of the way down the mountain when we had this conversation. And I sat down on the stairs of a small building called a warming hut, which is just a small wooden structure, a shack basically, on the side of the ski trail. And I sat down on the stairs and took my boot off completely, which felt good. Um, and then I had the darndest time trying to get it back on. I was really struggling with it. And it could have been that it was so cold that the plastic was just too rigid. Um, I'm not sure, but I tried everything, including laying down on my back and putting my foot up against the railing of the staircase and pushing really hard to try to get it on, and nothing was working. Um, and I just started having this feeling of sort of resignation that almost felt like dread and loneliness. And I often wonder if this was some sort of premonition, my body sort of percolating up to my brain that something was not right. Um, so I gave up and I called the ski patrol, and I asked them to give me a lift down the hill, which was kind of humiliating had they agreed to do it. But they didn't. What they did instead is two members of the ski patrol came up to the warming hut with a key, took me inside, found a hair dryer, heated up my boot so that it was pliable, got me into my boot, and said goodbye. Um, and I thought, well, that worked. So um, I put my skis on and clicked into my skis, and all of that probably took half hour to 40 minutes, as I recall. Maybe it wasn't that long, maybe it was longer, but it was a minute. I put my skis on and I started skiing down the hill to continue the run and get down to the lodge, and I think I took 2 turns and I suddenly felt, um, and I don't have a very clear memory of what it felt like, which is probably normal. Um, but what I recall feeling was like something seized up in the middle of my chest, like a hard stop deep in my chest. I don't recall it being painful, but it probably was. And then followed by a burning, tearing sensation throughout the length of my abdomen, my chest and my abdomen. Um, and it was, um, an intense feeling. It felt like it was deep inside my body. It was clearly heart related. I assumed it was a heart attack. And at that exact moment, I thought I was going to die. And I remember looking up at the sky and thinking, well, I guess this is how I'm going out. I mean, really. Um, but I was still on my feet, and I managed to get my cell phone out of my chest pocket and call my wife, who was in the car with our 2 boys. And unfortunately, she put me on speakerphone, of course. She didn't know anything was wrong. And I said, I said, I'm having a cardiac event. Um, and I could hear her take like a minute to process it. And she might have, you know, yelled in a panicked fashion, like, initially, but she quickly got it together and said, okay, I'll meet you down at the lodge. I said, I'm going to try to ski to the bottom of the hill. I must have said that. And the thing is, like, I knew that if I just kind of pulled over and flopped down on the side of the mountain, by the time we got the message to ski patrol and got somebody up the hill to get to me, it might be too late. So I thought my best chance was to just use gravity and get down the mountain to where there were people. So that's what I did. And I just kind of went into a tuck and did a straight shot down to the lodge. And luckily I had the leg strength and the sort of presence of mind to get to the lodge. I was still feeling all sorts of things in my chest. Um, I got to the lodge. I took my skis off. I sat in a chair on the back deck. There were probably 50 or 60 people just standing around drinking beers by the fire pits and enjoying themselves. And I sat for a moment and I tried to just kind of gather my thoughts and determine whether I was overreacting and maybe it was some sort of panic attack. Um, and then I realized, no, whatever's happening is still happening, and time is of the essence. And I yelled out, I think I'm having a heart attack. At which point, a bunch of people surrounded me. Somebody called paramedics. The ski patrol and the resort's paramedics came over to me. And I shared with them that I did have an aortic dissection. I'm sorry, an aneurysm and a bad valve, and that I was scheduled for surgery in March. And I think sharing that piece of information may have saved my life because they got an ambulance and told the ambulance drivers there were two choices. They could either drive for roughly an hour and take me to a level 3 hospital with an ER in Plattsburgh, New York, or they could take me to Saranac Lake, which was, I think, a trauma center. Um, they opted to take me to the ER, and they were already suspecting that this was an aortic dissection based on me telling them about the aneurysm, and the fact that they were having difficulty getting a pulse in my leg. And the reason that might have been, a life-saving decision is they knew that I would probably have to go to eventually um, to the University of Vermont Health Center in Burlington, Vermont, for emergency surgery, and it would be faster for me to get there if I started out at Saranac Lake. I'm sorry, at the Plattsburgh ER. Um, so that was the decision they made. They also decided not to treat me for a heart attack. And had they treated me for a heart attack, I believe they would have given me blood thinners. And if they'd given me blood thinners, that would have made surgery more complicated and maybe even would have had been pushed back. So some really smart decisions by just the ski resort paramedics. Um, so I wound up in an ambulance, and I was conscious, and things had sort of calmed down, but I could hear the paramedics talking, and I had extremely low blood pressure. Um, I want to say it was something like 60 over 40, and they couldn't get a pulse in my leg. Um, and so now we're in an ambulance and we're driving along these winding roads at a high speed in the icy and snowy conditions. The ambulance driver was incredible. He should be an F1 or something. So they got me to the Plattsburgh ER. Um, and it was a weekend and they were understaffed, and they had a pretty high census, and things were sort of dragging for a few hours there. And my wife and I, getting a bit agitated, and actually called my cardiologist, or called the surgeon in Philadelphia, um, and asked him if he could speak to the ER staff. And there was professional courtesy and so forth. So he was deferring to them, but um, we were thinking, can we get flown to Philadelphia for surgery? But there was no way that was going to happen. Anyway, one small sort of victory for technology here was that all of my imaging was on the Epic MyChart app on my mobile phone. So I was able to pull up my echoes and CT scans and other things and actually show them to the doctors in the ER and orient them to what was going on under the hood. at which point they strongly started to suspect that this was a dissection, did an ultrasound, confirmed that it was in fact a dissection. We'd already lost 3-4 hours. They forwarded the images to the University of Vermont, UVM Burlington. UVM concurred with the diagnosis, approved me for emergency surgery, and I was put on a helicopter. And it was like a 20-minute flight to UVM Burlington. And my wife, meanwhile, was trying to get to the hospital, but it's hard by car. She had to actually take a car onto a ferry across the Lake Champlain. And our friends, our travel companions, took the kids. And I got cleared for surgery, and I got wheeled into surgery. I think if my wife were here, she'd probably correct some of my timeline or my times, but I think it was around 10:30 at night that I went into surgery at UVM Burlington. We got consent over the phone with my wife, ran through that stuff, and then it was like boom, I went under. The surgeon at UVM Burlington, he's now at SUNY Upstate Medical Center in New York, where he's, I believe, head of cardiothoracic surgery, chief surgeon. His name is Dr. Marek Polomsky, and he's brilliant. And he saved my life. And over the course of 18 hours, and I think a full 18 hours on the heart-lung bypass machine, he grafted my aorta, replaced my aortic valve with a mechanical valve, and replaced my mitral valve with a mechanical valve, and did a few other things. My wife was alone in the lobby of the hotel with a friend who happened to live nearby in Vermont and came to keep her company and bring a change of clothes and food and that sort of stuff. I don't think my wife heard anything from the surgery team until 6 or 7 hours later, where they came out to give her an update that, some of the worst was behind us, but there was a lot more that could go wrong. There was still a risk of stroke. There was a risk of all sorts of things. When you're on a heart-lung bypass for that long, organ failure and a bunch of other things, are possible. I think stroke's probably the highest risk beyond the bleeding itself. But anyway, the surgery was a complete success. I woke up a few days later in the ICU. I spent 5 or 6 days in the ICU at UV Burlington. My family from Pennsylvania joined us. The nursing team at that hospital is phenomenal. The culture at that health center is phenomenal. Everyone was competent and professional and had great bedside manner, and everyone in that hospital was coming by to see me because word had spread that Dr. Polomsky had just performed a complete tour de force emergency surgery, and everyone wanted to talk to me. And it's a teaching hospital, so you can imagine, I was I was quite a specimen for them. And I came out of, I woke up fine, and early days were foggy and a lot of fluids, and it was a major surgery. I was cut up. I think I have about it's probably, I can't believe I don't know this for sure, but it's at least a 12-inch scar, but it's not bad. And then some ancillary incisions that scarred. My recovery at the hospital was on the order of 3 weeks. It was a long recovery. but they took really good care of me, and I'm blessed that I had, a lot of friends and family come visit over the course of 3 weeks. Um, I was on obviously pain meds, um, but I was kind of careful with those. And the whole thing is you have to stay ahead of the pain. You don't want it to get ahead of you. It's very hard to play catch up. So there's no point in being a hero and not taking your pain meds when you feel pain encroaching. um but I think we were sort of disciplined about that. So I wasn't in a lot of pain, stayed ahead of that. And then I'm on blood thinners at that point. So getting my INR in the therapeutic range and keeping it there was a real challenge. And in fact, there were probably 4 or 5 days on the end of my stay where the only thing keeping me from being discharged was the fact that my INR was, sort of erratic. And that's to be expected. So my therapeutic range for my INR, which is basically a standardized measure of how long it takes your blood to form clots. My INR range was 2.5 to 3.5, which is moderately high intensity anticoagulation. Um, when you have mechanical valves, there's an increased risk of blood clots, um, because of the way the valves chop the blood cells, the red blood cells, chop them up. Um, and because your blood moves differently through a mechanical valve than it does through a natural valve, and a bunch of other physics around that I sort of barely understand. But the long and short of it is, when you have mechanical valves, you need to go on blood thinners so that because you're at an elevated risk of a blood clot. But it's not something I've ever seriously worried about. On the other end of the spectrum, if your INR is too high, you're at an increased risk for internal bleeding. Um, so this is just one of those variables that you need to manage with mechanical valves. Um, but gradually I regained my strength, and we prepared for the trip back to Philadelphia after about 3.5 weeks. Obviously my work knew I was on, indefinite leave at that point. We looked into ambulances and other non-emergent medical transport back to Philadelphia, and kind of checked out what insurance would cover and what the options were, but ultimately decided that, like, my wife would drive and I would sit in the back seat, with my um, and with the front seat folded down and my legs up, and pillows on my chest, because in those early days, protecting the incision while it heals, and your sternum knits, is really, really important. Um, and we drove back to Philadelphia. Spent a couple nights in a hotel just to make sure the house was ready, and everything like that, and then came back to the house. Um, my memory of this is a little foggy, but I think I continued sleeping in my bed on the third floor. I don't think I slept in the living room of our house. Um, it took about a month for my chest to heal. I definitely wasn't driving. I started physical therapy, PT and OT, through my local hospital, pretty quickly. And that really amounted to, like, walking as much as possible around the neighborhood and around the block. Um, and I had a really strong recovery. Um, I ultimately, 3 months later, um, and they really don't know why, but about 3 months later, I started showing signs of congestive heart failure, and had to be rehospitalized, with a very low ejection fraction of about 10%. My heart had been through a lot. There's no question about it. And there's all sorts of things happening with the physics of volume, blood volume, and so forth that might have tripped me into a heart failure situation. Um, so after 5 days in the hospital for that, I came out, and really, to be frank, since then, and that was Memorial Day of 2024, no, 2023. Um, it's really been the heart failure that I've been more focused on than the aortic aneurysm. But let me not dwell on that, except to say my heart function has improved dramatically in the ensuing 2 years. I am on a lot of medications for my heart in general. Um, I take Coreg and Entresto and Farxiga and Plerinone, and of course warfarin and baby aspirin, and I think that's it as far as the cardiac sort of related meds goes. It's basically 5 meds plus aspirin. Um, I am not completely out of the woods. The surgical repairs, I've had 2 CT scans since the surgery, and everything looks great with the surgical repairs. The valves are seated appropriately, like the graft looks great, etc. But as is typical, well, let me just say, so I have a I have a dissection of the ascending aorta as well as a dissection of the descending aorta. My surgeon says that people often erroneously refer to the dissection of the descending aorta as a type B. And I had heard that term thrown about. He said, you do not have a type A and a type B. It's a ascending and descending dissection. Um, that dissection extends the length of my aorta up through the arch, um, down through the abdomen, into the iliac arteries that go to the kidneys, and in the subclavian artery um, under your collarbone, and into the carotid arteries to my brain. It has not extended very far into the carotid arteries. In fact, there's been no growth in that dissection or um, extension or progression of that dissection. But that additional dissection most likely occurred after the surgery. Once things start tearing, as with anything, once they start tearing, they kind of keep tearing until something stops them. Thankfully, the dissection did not extend into my organs. That can be a big problem. So it's stable, but it is something that they're watching closely, particularly the dissection of my carotid arteries. Um, and the name of the game there really is blood pressure and keeping the blood pressure down. And so my diet has changed dramatically. It's a low salt diet. I do not eat red meats. I occasionally have a burger, very occasionally. But I am mindful of my vitamin K intake because you don't want to counteract the warfarin, the blood thinners, but I am not uptight about it. I've kind of gotten to a steady state with my diet and my INR where I kind of know, you know, um, I'm kind of in a good place with my diet. So I don't have to be hyper vigilant about it, just mindful. Um, and I feel really good. I feel really good. I felt, obviously I have a heart that's beating correctly and where the blood flow is in the right direction and the aneurysm's been repaired and so forth, and all of that helps. And my ejection fraction is increased, improved over time. Actually, I have an echo coming up in January where I'll really really get a good picture of heart function. So it's been a year since my last echo. um, but I can walk. I can do just about everything except lift really heavy things. Um, I hope to ski this winter. I did not ski last winter. I'm fully cleared to do so. I've talked to 6 or 7 different medical professionals and read a bunch of stuff. And really, the big thing is head injuries. So that's just about being smart and wearing a helmet, which I do anyway. So that'll be a big moment for me and my family when we ski again for the first time. And we'll see if it's at Whiteface. um, I I've never been diagnosed with PTSD or anything like that, but I wouldn't be surprised if I could be diagnosed for it, and I do go to therapy, and I did choose a therapist who specializes in health issues, life transitions, and other trauma, and that's very helpful. And in fact, I shared my story with her early on, but we really got into it fairly recently. um, and I think that's very helpful. um, I would just say, I mean, no one I had an emergency surgery, and I'm lucky that it went well. There are a lot of things that could have gone wrong, and they didn't, and for that I'm grateful and I feel blessed. um, but anyone that is listen to your doctors and get second opinions, but I think being proactive when it comes to addressing an enlarged heart, a mitral valve, anything of that nature. I think be proactive. Don't wait too long um, to get a plan together. My dissection may well have been a freak event that was just sort of a coincidence with everything else that was going on. My surgeon in Philadelphia, who's um, the guy who's following me now for this event, who was going to do the elective surgery, but now he's just following me, following Vermont. The surgeon in Vermont knew the surgeon in Philadelphia and knew him by reputation. So he's a major guy in this field. Um, Namesh Desai is his name, and he's following me. He probably would have been a little more proactive. I dragged my feet and just working with a general cardiologist and taking a watchful waiting approach. In retrospect, I wish I had um, gotten a transesophageal EKG sooner, gotten a good look at the valve, understood that this is going to get worse quickly, and maybe started consulting with surgeons sooner than I did. But nothing you can do about that. um, my point is, I'm alive. I've lost a lot of weight. I feel good. My life is very full. I'm present for my kids. Um, I'm getting good sleep. I can do everything I need to do in my daily life. And for that, I'm very grateful. I'm grateful for the skill and dedication of every paramedic, nurse, and surgeon and ski patrol um, person that helped me get to this point. Um, I think everybody's journey is different, and it's good to plug in and talk. But ultimately, this is something you need to. It's something you have to walk yourself. You're not alone, but it's a personal journey, and does require some strength and some hope and support, but also a little bit of trust in science and trust in the skill of your fellow humans. And I just had a feeling if they get me on a helicopter and they get me to the hospital, it's going to be all right. That was an idea that I just held in my head while I was in the ER. And my wife had a was plugged into some major cosmic sort of forces throughout the surgery, and she gave me strength as well. And I don't know that there's much else to say. There are probably things that I have forgotten. It's been a lot, but you just take it a day at a time. You take a step at a time, one test at a time. And this is the sort of thing they are getting better and better at every year. So I'm sure I got state of the art care, but somebody that goes through this 2 years from now may be getting getting care that's even more advanced. Um, all right. Well, I hope this was helpful. And I think that that's all I have to say. Thanks for listening.